Hello out there. This video is a part 2 to my video on overcoming and understanding anxiety. So in this session, I just want to discuss 3 different sort of strategies or methods to gaining a little bit more control over your anxiety. Obviously, what's been helpful for me in my life might not necessarily be helpful for you. The only reason I'm sharing this information is because it was significantly helpful for me, and there seems to be a desire in others to want to know from my last video what the more concrete strategies I used were. So that is essentially what I'm doing today. So obviously this is not a substitute for a medical opinion on your situation. This is just one person who developed anxiety and pieces of how they overcame it. Each person's anxiety is likely different. It's sort of unique to who they are, how they think, their brain chemistry, their personality, all those types of things. So too, their path to recovery is going to be different than others based on their own features of uniqueness, the things that make their anxiety particular to them. So with that being said, however, the 3 things that I want to talk about are visualization meditation, as well as Hinduism, and as well as Buddhism. So beginning with meditation, obviously the common form or the most known form of meditation, to my knowledge, is when you essentially just find somewhere by yourself, you sit down and you go into yourself to sort of calm the mind, to rid the mind of thoughts. So you would do that by beginning with deep breaths, in through the nose, out through the mouth, with the out through the mouth longer than the in through the nose. I didn't find that helpful to me in terms of getting a hold and taking control of my anxiety proactively. I found meditation techniques like that useful when I was in the throes of a panic attack or an anxiety attack. That was an effective way to calm myself down, to force myself in a way to stop thinking and to just focus on breathing. But in terms of proactive approaches to overcoming anxiety, I didn't really see how that was helpful. What I did find that was helpful is a kind of visualization meditation in terms of proactive approaches. And so what I mean by that is to begin a meditation process similar to how you would begin a normal one. So sit down by yourself, close your eyes, deep breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth, calm yourself. Like make sure that you get to a point where you just feel at ease, where thoughts are not racing as much, and you're just more in a calm state of mind. And what I found helpful once in that state was to visualize the situations that trigger me, to visualize all of the instances where I've had an anxious response to something, where I've started shaking or where I've started having an attack come on, and picturing the way that I want to react to those circumstances. So instead of reacting with shaking, reacting with calm, reacting with confidence, being certain in myself, being sure in myself. And what's key here, or what was key here for me, was to feel how I would feel were that situation literally unfolding. So I'm basically in my head practicing how I want to react, the kind of way I want to be. And the reason in that to me is I felt that based on, for example, the principle of neuroscience we discussed in my previous video, is that I felt that doing that would be a way of sort of beginning to form new connections in my brain, new pathways for my neurons to fire when I'm actually in that situation. So obviously being by yourself in your head is one thing and being in the world is another thing. But what's very important to forming new habits is forming those new connections in your brain. So for me, I felt like I needed to practice that somehow. I needed to get a head start before going out into the world on how I was going to go about that. And so ultimately, does it work overnight? Absolutely not. Nothing works overnight. It's a repetitive process. It's practice. It's training yourself. It's forming new connections in your brain. So For me, I felt that helped significantly. I would especially do it before I was going into something stressful, so that I'd already be in that kind of state of mind of control, that I know how I want to act, I know how I want to be, and I've seen myself in my head act out that way, and I know I can do it. So for me, that was extremely helpful. So I don't know if anyone else has practiced that or has tried that, but I would really recommend that, because for me, over time, that definitely helped. And I even still do that on occasion when I feel like I need to. So simply find a place by yourself, start to calm yourself or slow your mind down by breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. Do that until you feel like your thoughts aren't racing, until you just feel sort of calm and relaxed. And then try to make this more of an internal visual process than necessarily a rational process. That is, picture the situations you're going to be in. Picture how you want yourself to react. Try to feel how it would feel to successfully react in the way that you wish to react, rather than in the old way with the old anxious patterns. And go over situations like that, whatever they may be, whether it's a presentation, whether it's just talking to people, whatever triggers your anxiety. Do that, and do it repetitively, and then go out into the world and practice it. So, as I said, that doesn't mean when you go out into the world and practice it, you're immediately going to see results. No, it's a process. Change is a process. It does not happen overnight. So, on to the next two things that I found very helpful. Both Buddhism and Hinduism. So, I'm not necessarily advocating that you become a Buddhist or you become a Hindu, but I think that there are Hindu texts and Buddhist texts which, when you read them, spend time with them, reflect on them, they sort of open your mind to a different way of thinking about the world and your place in it. And it doesn't mean you necessarily have to believe them as true, but rather that given in our state of existence, nothing is necessarily certain in terms of what it all means, what's actually happening here. Given that, it stands to reason to me that many things could be possible. And for me, the metaphysics of Buddhism and Hinduism, while not all of it, there are some propositions there that do seem reasonable and do seem kind of calming, kind of grounding in a way that's, I think, fruitful to add to your daily thoughts about how the world is. Before I break into talking about what I think is helpful about Buddhism and Hinduism, I want to add that there are a number of different interpretations that people can make of any religion or system of thought. So my interpretation is what I learned when I studied Indian philosophy in school. So from my professor who had a specialization in Indian philosophy. So that is the interpretation I bring with me. So this interpretation is more allegorical than literal. So to break into it then, for example, in Hinduism, you're probably familiar, if you know anything about it, the many-faced gods, right? The statues with many arms, many faces, many attributes. So what that means in the interpretation I was taught is essentially a kind of pantheism. So pantheism is the idea that God or the creative force, whatever it might be, penetrates through everything. So you might have heard the saying, the one is many and the many are one. So that is to say of the world that everything that exists is a manifestation of the same underlying unity or the same underlying creative force in some capacity. So that statue embodies sort of a display of that or an example of that. It's not meant to be the God literally, there's a God and he has many arms and many faces and many heads. It's no, there is some creative force which manifests through everything in which we are ourselves experiencing and a product of. And so what that all-pervasive force in Hinduism is called is Atman, or self. So if you were to look at the world through that lens, you would realize yourself as a manifestation of that force, as you as your own particular individuation of that force, but a part of that force nonetheless, just as everyone else around you and everything else around you. So to meditate upon that, I find can be very calming because it makes the world a lot less confrontational towards you. So I mean, going into, for example, like maybe a presentation at work or school, with the idea that everything is sort of a manifestation of the same thing, and this reality we're experiencing, these people across from me, they're me in some capacity. And I think there's a sort of a comfort there. I think there can be a comfort in that. There can be a sort of calming sense, less of a, all of these people are separate from me and they wish to judge me, they wish to rip me apart, and here I am subject to them. I think taking on other perspectives such as that just provide a sort of calming effect. It's difficult to explain, but I think in, for example, in your meditations, it's something interesting to think about. And so some texts that I'd recommend reading if you're interested in that would be, for example, the Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads. So I do have a book that I'm going to recommend that's not sponsored. This is called a Sourcebook in Indian Philosophy. If you'd like to get it, I'll put a link in the description for it. This basically tries to be a comprehensive covering of the history of Indian philosophy. So it's not just limited to Hinduism, there's Buddhism in here as well, there's Jainism, there's all kinds of things, and a lot of information about the text. It's a great book. So if you're interested, and you want these things all in one place, I would strongly recommend this book. But you could also, I'm sure, just Google the Upanishads or Google the, like the Vedas or Google the Bhagavad Gita, and you'd probably be able to find it. But for me, I love books and I love having everything in my hands. I think there's something more personal about that. You know, who the hell wants to print off like a 100-page document? Not me. So yeah, so tell me what your thoughts are about that. And as I said, it's not that you have to take it literally, or that I'm suggesting necessarily you take it literally, but rather that it's interesting food for thought, and it's interesting thought to try to ground yourself in, or to incorporate into yourself in the way that you look at things. For Buddhism, my analysis is basically the same thing, or my suggestions are the same thing. So Buddhism and Hinduism are related in the sense that they're somewhat contrary. So what's central to Hinduism is Atman, or the self, and what's central to Buddhism is anatta and anicca. So anatta is a direct negation of self. It's no self, as opposed to Atman, self. And further, anicca is impermanence, or something that's transient, temporary. So from the Buddhist perspective, reality, we are not all manifestations of some universal self. Rather, what we truly are cannot be genuinely known or stated. All that can truly be known or stated is that everything that comes into existence passes out of it. For every second that something is in existence, it's in some degree of a state of change. So just as the tree comes to life, it also dies. Just as grass grows, it gets covered over, it passes away. Even something like the ocean is constantly moving. It's never in a state of being exactly the same. The human being is life at every instance walking towards death. Everything comes to be and passes over. So in that way, you've probably heard one of the common slogans of Buddhism, at least in popular culture, and how it's portrayed in movies, such as, for example, The Matrix, is that the world is an illusion in that capacity. Right, when the child monk in The Matrix says to Neo, the trick is not to bend the spoon, but to realize there is no spoon. It's to master reality in such a way as to understand that this thing is temporary, transitory, and that for you to conquer it or master it is not for you to manipulate it, but for you to understand its true nature and thereby gain power over it. So in that way, I find that Buddhism is helpful and powerful because it takes away some pressure, I think, from existence. I mean, it takes away this do or die mentality and helps you understand that everything simply is do and die. It's just exists temporarily and pass away. It's a way of understanding that this doesn't need to be so stressful. It simply is what it is. Moreover, the texts of Buddhism also aim to connect with you how you can master your understanding of reality. So how your thoughts are connected to your actions, to your words, how things lead into each other and create each other, sustain each other. So the point about Buddhism that I really just want to bring forth or extend is that I find that also meditating on these concepts of anicca and anatta help you make peace with the way that things are. And I think that making peace with the way that the world is, or grounding yourself in the world in some way, helps relieve the tension of your anxiety. It helps ground you in something from which you can stand on, and from which you can feel less vulnerable and chaotic and uncertain. So many of the major Buddhist texts, the most important snippets of them, are in this book as well. It's a complete overview of Indian philosophy. So to summarize then, each of the things I suggested, so visualization, meditation upon Hinduism and Buddhism, all of these things are about grounding yourself, grounding your vision of who you want to be, and grounding your understanding of yourself in the world. I think those are, at least they were for me, two of the most important features of getting myself better and getting myself in a place where I felt at home in the world. I felt okay. For me, as I started to learn these things and practice these things and incorporate them into my own life, I can't say that it was just one day all of a sudden I was cured of my anxiety. No, it's just through learning and through grounding myself and my understanding of myself and my desires for myself and my understanding of being in the world, I just, over time, over the course of 4 years, just started to feel that anxiety just melt away. Slowly, until one day you just find yourself in situations that would have in the past upset you or caused you to be triggered or have your anxiety triggered, and you realize you're fine, you're okay. So it takes work and it takes practice and it takes spending time with yourself. So I hope you found some of these ideas helpful. Please let me know if you did, and even if you didn't, in the comments below. And I hope to soon do a more substantive review of Buddhism as well as Hinduism, and as well as on visualization. So this was more of an introduction to those things, and we will get into them more on this channel later. Thanks for your presence. I hope your situation gets better.